The old harbor warehouse in Boothbay, Maine, trembled under a gust of wind that rattled its rusted tin roof, sending a shiver through the crowd packed inside. Shadows danced wildly as a single bulb flickered overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on the concrete floor where a German shepherd lay sprawled, motionless. His scarred body heaved with shallow breaths, ribs jutting beneath a dull coat matted with filth. Sneers erupted. "Worthless mutt!" as the auctioneer's gavel slammed down. Then a small figure darted forward. 7-year-old Tommy Sullivan, his sneakers squeaking, his heart pounding. "Stop!" he cried, voice piercing the din, just as a burly man raised a boot toward the dog's head. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. The air thickened with tension, a storm brewing both inside and out. The man froze, his boot hovering, eyes narrowing at the boy, who stood trembling, yet defiant, fists clenched. Tommy's pale face, framed by a mop of sandy hair, glistened with sweat under the dim light. The crowd hushed, their mocking laughter snuffed out by the raw desperation in his plea. Agnes O'Connor, his grandmother, pushed through the throng, her gray eyes wide with alarm. She reached for Tommy, but he stood firm, staring at the dog, whose dull amber eyes flickered, alive, aware, and locked on him. The warehouse smelled of salt and decay, a relic of Boothbay's fishing heyday, now reduced to a cavern for cast-offs and curiosities. The sea roared beyond the warped wooden walls, its restless waves crashing against the docks, a fitting chorus to the scene unfolding within. It was late March, the kind of damp evening that clung to the bones, and the county auction had drawn a motley crowd, fishermen in oilskins, widows clutching worn purses, and a few roughneck looking for cheap thrills. They'd come for rusted anchors and chipped china, not this broken creature sprawled before them. Tommy hadn't wanted to be here. Agnes had dragged him along after supper, muttering about needing a new lamp for the cottage parlor. "Just a quick stop, Tommy," she'd promised, her voice carrying that gentle firmness honed from years as a Vietnam War nurse. But the moment they'd stepped inside, Tommy's gaze had snagged on the dog. A heap of fur and scars in the center of the room, ignored until the auctioneer hauled him up for the final lot. "Former military mutt," the man barked, his voice cracking with impatience. "Aggressive, untrainable. Starting bid's $50. Anyone?" Laughter rippled through the crowd, sharp and cruel. "Not worth a dime," someone jeered. "Damaged goods," another spat. Agnes watched her grandson, her heart twisting. Tommy was a quiet boy, too small for his age, with a dreamer's eyes that saw more than they should. Since his parents' car accident 2 years back, he'd retreated into himself, speaking little, clinging to her like a lifeline. She'd hoped the auction might spark some childish curiosity, but now she saw something else flickering in him, something fierce and fragile all at once. His hands balled into fists as the auctioneer shrugged, ready to move on. "Final chance, folks, or he's off to the pound, or worse." "I'll take him," Tommy said, his voice slicing through the murmurs like a blade. It wasn't loud, but it carried clear and steady, startling even himself. The room fell silent, head swiveling to the boy in the back row, his faded red jacket dwarfed by the sea of adults. Agnes's breath caught. She stepped forward, her worn boots scuffing the floor. "Tommy, honey, what are you—" she began, but he shook his head, eyes fixed on the dog. The German shepherd hadn't moved, not even when the auctioneer prodded him with a stick earlier, drawing snickers. His body told a story of unspoken horrors, old wounds crisscrossing his flanks, a notched ear, a tail that hung limp. Once a proud soldier, now a shell, he didn't lift his head as the whispers grew. But when Tommy spoke, something shifted. Those amber eyes, dulled by pain, flicked toward the boy, a spark of recognition or perhaps curiosity, flaring briefly in their depths. The auctioneer scratched his stubbled chin, smirking. "You got $50, kid." Tommy's face flushed. He had nothing but the dime in his pocket from last week's chore money. Agnes hesitated, her pension stretched thin, but she saw the plea in Tommy's gaze, something she hadn't seen since before the accident. With a sigh, she fished a crumpled 50 from her purse, the last of her grocery cash. "We'll take him," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. The crowd muttered, some amused, some annoyed, but no one bid against them. From the shadows near a stack of crates, Lila Hayes watched, her sharp green eyes narrowing. At 16, she was the town's nosy dreamer, always poking into mysteries the grown-ups ignored. She'd slipped in to snatch a cheap trinket, but now her attention locked on Tommy and the dog. Something about the boy's stand tugged at her, a bravery she hadn't expected from the quiet kid next door. The auctioneer handed over a worn leather leash, its edges frayed like the dog it was meant to bind. "He's all yours, kid," he said, a mocking edge to his tone. "Though I'd watch those teeth. He's unpredictable." Tommy took the leash, his small hands trembling, not from fear but from a strange swelling resolve. He knelt 6 feet from the dog, mirroring a calmness he'd once heard Agnes describe from her nursing days, how she'd soothe soldiers fresh from battle. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, soft as the wind outside. "I'm Tommy. I'm not gonna hurt you." The dog's muscles tensed, ears flattening slightly, a low rumble stirring in his chest. But he didn't lunge or snap. His gaze held Tommy, searching as if weighing the boy's words against a lifetime of betrayal. Agnes hovered behind, her heart pounding. She knew animals like this, soldiers like this, too broken to trust easily. Yet Tommy didn't flinch, his voice steady despite the quiver in his lips. "We're gonna go home now, okay?" The crowd dispersed, grumbling about the night's odd turn, leaving the warehouse to its ghosts. Outside, the moon hung low, a silver crescent slicing through the fog rolling off the Atlantic. Tommy led the way, the leash slack in his hand, Shadow trailing reluctantly behind. The dog's claws clicked on the gravel path, each step a battle against instincts screaming to flee. Agnes followed, her shawl pulled tight against the chill, her mind racing. What had they taken on? They reached the cottage, a weathered, clappered house perched above the dunes, its windows glowing faintly with lamplight. Tommy pushed open the gate, but Shadow stopped short, trembling, his eyes darting to the dark pines beyond. "Come on," Tommy urged, tugging gently. The dog didn't budge, planting himself in the yard like a sentinel. Agnes touched Tommy's shoulder. "Give him time, sweetheart. He's not used to kindness yet." The boy nodded, though disappointment flickered in his chest. He sat on the porch steps, the leash coiled beside him, watching Shadow stand rigid under the moonlight. The dog's scars gleamed faintly, a roadmap of pain etched into his fur. Somewhere in the distance a buoy bell clanged, mournful and steady, echoing the unspoken bond forming between them. From her bedroom window next door, Lila peeked out, her breath fogging the glass. She'd seen plenty of strays in Boothbay, but this dog was different, haunted like the boy who'd claimed him. She slipped a notebook from her shelf, scribbling a single word. mystery. Tomorrow she'd find out more. The night deepened, the sea's restless song lulling the town to sleep. Tommy stayed on the steps, his small frame dwarfed by the vastness around him, his eyes never leaving shadow. Something had begun here, a fragile thread tying two lost souls. What it would weave, only time would tell. The wind howled through Boothbay that night, rattling the cottage windows like a restless spirit clawing to get in. Inside, Tommy Sullivan pressed his nose to the glass, his breath fogging the pain as he watched Shadow stand rigid in the yard. The German Shepherd's silhouette was a dark statue against the moonlit dunes, his scarred body trembling faintly, eyes locked on the shadowy pine forest beyond. The boy's crayons lay abandoned on the table, his usual sketches of whales and ships replaced by an ache he couldn't name. Shadow hadn't eaten the scraps Tommy left by the door, hadn't even stepped onto the porch. Something was wrong, something deep and unspoken. Agnes O'Connor shuffled into the kitchen, her slippers whispering across the worn floorboards. She set a kettle on the stove, the hiss of gas a soft counterpoint to the storm outside. At 68, her hands bore the faint scars of a nurse's life, steadying soldiers, stitching wounds, holding the dying. She glanced at Tommy, his small frame hunched by the window, and felt a familiar pang. Since the car accident took his parents, he'd been a ghost in his own skin, quiet and watchful. Tonight, though, there was a spark in him, faint but real, tied to that broken dog outside. "Tommy, honey, come away from there," she called, pouring tea into a chipped mug. Her voice was gentle but firm, honed from years of coaxing battle-worn men back to life. He didn't move, his eyes tracing Shadow's every shiver. "He's scared, Nana," he murmured, his words half lost in the wind's wail. Agnes set the mug down and joined him, her shawl slipping as she peered out. The dog's ribs stood out like ridges on a washed-up shell, his fur matted with salt and grime. "Some creatures carry more than we can see," she said softly. "Back in the war, I patched up soldiers, and sometimes their dogs. They'd come home heroes, then get left behind. Like him." Tommy turned to her, his brown eyes wide. "Left behind?" Agnes nodded, settling into a chair with a creak. "Military dogs, trained to find bombs, save lives. When the fighting stopped, folks didn't know what to do with them. Too many ended up like that one, forgotten." Her gaze drifted, lost in memory. A muddy field hospital, a shepherd whining beside a stretcher, its handler gone. She shook her head, returning to the present. "He's been hurt, Tommy, not just his body. Give him time." The boy nodded, though his chest tightened. He knew about being left behind, waking to an empty house, the sheriff's voice on the phone, Agnes's arms pulling him close. He slipped on his sneakers, ignoring the late hour, and grabbed a scrap of bread from supper. "I'll try again," he said, determination edging his small voice. Agnes watched him go, her tea cooling untouched, a mix of pride and worry stirring in her. Outside, the air bit at Tommy's cheeks, salty and cold. The moon hung low, painting the yard in silver and shadow. He knelt 6 feet from Shadow, the distance a silent promise not to push. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, holding out the bread. "It's good, see?" The dog's ears twitched, but a low rumble rose from his throat, a warning born of instinct. Tommy froze, heart thudding, but he didn't back away. "I'm scared sometimes, too," he said, his voice trembling like the wind. "When it's dark, I think about Mom and Dad. But you're here now. We can be scared together." Shadow's growl faded, his head dipping as if the words weighed him down. His amber eyes met Tommy's, dull yet searching, and for a moment the world shrank to just them. Boy and dog, two souls adrift on the same stormy sea. From the fence line Lila Hayes watched, her green eyes glinting in the moonlight. She'd slipped out to stargaze, but Tommy's quiet courage drew her like a tide. "He's like a ghost," she muttered to herself, clutching her jacket tighter. This wasn't just a stray. This was something more. Back inside, Agnes stood by the door, her silhouette framed in warm light. She saw the shift in shadow, a slump of exhaustion, a flicker of trust, and her heart ached for them both. Tommy stayed put, the bread uneaten, his small hand resting on the cold ground. The dog didn't come closer, but he didn't retreat either. A fragile bridge forming beneath the moon's watchful gaze. Lila slipped away, her sneakers silent on the sandy path home. She'd seen enough to know this was no ordinary night. Tomorrow, she'd dig deeper. Tommy's ghost dog had a story, and she meant to find it. The wind carried a gull's cry, sharp and mournful, as the cottage settled into uneasy quiet. Shadow remained in the yard, a sentinel against the dark, while Tommy finally shuffled inside, his hope a flickering flame. Agnes tucked him in, whispering, "Sleep now, little man. He'll come around." But sleep eluded them all, the night alive with secrets yet to unfold. Fog rolled thick over Boothbay's beach the next morning, cloaking the dunes in a gray shroud that muffled the world. Tommy Sullivan trudged along the shore, his sneakers sinking into wet sand, Shadow trailing a cautious 10 feet behind. The boy tossed pebbles into the surf, their plunks swallowed by the waves' dull roar. He'd woken early, slipping out, before Agnes stirred, driven by a need to understand the dog who'd claimed his heart. Shadow moved like a phantom, his scarred frame weaving through the mist, eyes darting to every rustle, a crab skittering, a gull's shadow overhead. From the edge of the pines, Captain Daniel Morrow watched them, his grizzled face half hidden by a wool cap. He leaned on a cane, its tip buried in the sand, his sea-blue eyes narrowing as they fixed on Shadow. The old man lived in a shack near the tide line, a hermit since his Navy days ended, known to locals as a grump with a soft spot for strays. He'd seen the boy and dog leave the cottage, a hunch tugging him from his solitude. Now, as Shadow paused to sniff a driftwood log, Daniel stepped forward, his boots crunching shells. "That's no ordinary mutt, kid," he rasped, his voice rough as the tide. Tommy spun, startled, nearly dropping his pebble. Shadow tensed, ears flattening, but didn't growl, a sign he sensed no threat. Daniel squinted at the dog, tracing the scar above his left eye. "That's Rex. I'd know him anywhere. Saved a dozen boys in Afghanistan, sniffed out a bomb just before it blew." He tapped his cane, memories flooding back, dust and heat, a shepherd's bark cutting through chaos. He was a soldier, same as me. Tommy's mouth fell open, his small hands clutching his jacket. "A soldier?" he echoed, glancing at Shadow, who watched Daniel with a stillness that felt alive, alert. The old man nodded, easing onto a weathered rock. 3 tours, medals to prove it. But something went wrong. Those scars ain't from war, not all of them. Someone hurt him bad after." His voice darkened, hinting at a name he wouldn't yet speak. The boy sank to his knees in the sand, closer to Shadow than ever before, though still out of reach. "Who'd hurt a hero?" he asked, his voice small but fierce. Daniel's jaw tightened, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "A man named Harrison, Major James Harrison. Ran a program, thought he could break dogs into perfect machines. Rex didn't break easy. The words hung heavy, a storm brewing in the old man's tone. Thunder rumbled offshore, a low growl that shook the air. Shadow's head snapped up, his body stiffening as lightning flashed over the sea. Before Tommy could blink, the dog bolted, a blur of fur vanishing into the pine forest beyond the dunes. "Shadow!" Tommy yelled, scrambling to his feet. Daniel grabbed for him, but the boy was off, racing into the fog, his sneakers pounding the earth. "Wait, kid!" the captain shouted, his cane slowing him. Agnes's voice echoed faintly from the cottage. "Tommy!" But the storm swallowed it. Rain began to fall, cold and sharp, soaking Tommy's jacket as he plunged into the woods. The pines loomed like sentinels, their needles whispering secrets in the wind. He stumbled over roots, calling Shadow's name, his breath hitching with fear and hope. Deeper in, he found the dog, curled beneath a gnarled tree, trembling, his eyes wild with ghosts of memory. Thunder cracked again, and Shadow flinched, a whimper escaping his throat. Tommy dropped to the muddy ground, 6 feet away, rain plastering his hair to his face. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his voice steady despite the shiver in his bones. "I'm here, Shadow. I won't let 'em hurt you." The dog's ears twitched, his gaze locking on the boy, a flicker of recognition cutting through the panic. For a long moment they sat there, rain drumming a rhythm around them, 2 small figures dwarfed by the storm. Daniel limped up, panting, his cap dripping. He saw the scene, Tommy's quiet courage, Shadow's tentative stillness, and something softened in his weathered face. "You're a brave one, kid," he muttered, leaning on his cane. "He sees it, too." Agnes burst through the trees, her shawl sodden, her voice sharp with worry. "Thomas Sullivan, you scared me half to death." She pulled him into a hug, then froze, spotting Shadow's shift. Closer to Tommy now, not retreating. The rain eased, the fog lifting to reveal a sky bruised with clouds. Daniel helped them back to the cottage, his mind churning with Harrison's name. Agnes dried Tommy by the fire, scolding softly, but her eyes lingered on Shadow, who lay just outside the porch, nearer than before, a step toward trust. The boy clutched a towel, whispering, "He's a hero, Nana." She nodded, her nurse's instincts humming. Something bigger was at play, and it wouldn't stay buried long. The cottage kitchen glowed softly that afternoon, the scent of chamomile tea mingling with the salty tang drifting through the open window. Agnes O'Connor sat at the table, her gray hair pulled into a loose bun, her hands steady as she brushed Shadow's matted fur with an old comb. The German shepherd lay on a blanket by the hearth, his body tense but still, a concession to Tommy's gentle insistence. The boy knelt nearby, his small fingers tracing a drawing of a dog and a soldier, his brow furrowed with questions sparked by Captain Daniel Morrow's tale. Outside, the sea whispered restlessly, a gray veil of clouds cloaking Boothbay in quiet unease. Agnes paused mid-stroke, her fingers brushing something hard beneath Shadow's thick neck fur. She squinted, parting the strands, and gasped. A metal tag, rusted and half buried in his skin, glinted in the lamplight. "Tommy, fetch me the tweezers," she said, her voice sharp with a nurse's urgency. He scrambled to the drawer, his sneakers squeaking, and handed them over with wide eyes. With practiced care, she pried the tag free, wincing as Shadow flinched, a low whine escaping him. She held it up, the engraved words stark against the worn surface. Major James Harrison. The name hit her like a cold wave. Agnes's hands trembled, memories of war flickering, whispers of a ruthless officer, a man who'd twisted loyalty into cruelty. She dropped the tag onto the table, its clink echoing in the stillness. Tommy leaned closer, his voice small. "Who's that, Nana?" Before she could answer, the front door creaked open, and Captain Daniel Morrow stepped in, his cane tapping the floorboards. He'd come uninvited, drawn by a hunch after their beach encounter, and his sea-blue eyes darkened at the sight of the tag. "Harrison," he muttered, his tone gravelly with disgust. "That's the bastard who broke him." Tommy's chest tightened, his drawing forgotten. "Broke him?" he echoed, glancing at Shadow, who watched him with amber eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 silent screams. Daniel sank into a chair, his weathered hands gripping his cane. "Major James Harrison ran a program, military dogs trained to death. Thought he could make 'em machines, not soldiers. Rex, your Shadow, wouldn't bend. Those scars. Not all from bombs. Harrison's work." His voice cracked, a rare fracture in the gruff armor, and Agnes nodded, her nurse's instincts confirming the truth in every jagged line on the dog's body. The moment hung heavy, the air thick with unspoken pain. Then a knock rattled the door, soft but insistent. Agnes rose, brushing her hands on her apron, and opened it to find Margaret Maggie Pierce, the bakery widow, balancing a tray of scones. Her kind face, framed by silver curls, faltered as she caught the tension inside. "Everything all right, Agnes?" she asked, stepping in. She set the tray down, her eyes darting to the tag, and listened as Daniel recounted Harrison's cruelty, abusing dogs, discarding them like spent shells. Maggie's hand flew to her mouth. "That's monstrous. You ought to call Sheriff Davidson, Agnes. No telling what that man's capable of." Tommy barely heard her, his gaze fixed on Shadow. The dog's ears twitched at Harrison's name, a shiver rippling through him. The boy slid closer, whispering, "You're safe here." His voice a lifeline in the storm brewing within them all. But outside, the world shifted. Down the sandy lane a stranger lingered, Victor Grayson, a lean figure in a black coat, his cold eyes scanning the cottage. He had arrived in Boothbay that morning, asking cryptic questions at the docks. Seen a kid with a scarred dog? The fisherman shrugged him off, but his presence slithered through the town like oil on water. Night fell, the moon obscured by thickening clouds. Agnes tucked Tommy in, her mind racing. She'd seen men like Harrison before, power-hungry, ruthless. And now one of his shadows had found them. Downstairs she locked the doors, her hands steady despite the dread curling in her gut. Shadow paced the yard, his growl low as Victor's silhouette loomed near the fence. Unseen but felt, a predator circling prey. From her window next door, Lila Hayes watched, her green eyes narrowing. She'd overheard the fisherman's grumbles about the stranger and now saw him skulking near Tommy's place. Her notebook lay open, scribbled with questions. Who's after the ghost dog? She slipped on her jacket, vowing to warn Tommy tomorrow. The night deepened, the sea's restless song a warning of trouble creeping closer. Agnes sat by the fire, the tag in her hand, knowing this was no mere rescue, it was a fight just beginning. Rain lashed Boothbay the next day, a gray curtain blurring the line between sea and sky. Tommy Sullivan sat on the cottage porch, his knees drawn up, watching Shadow huddle beneath the overhang. The German shepherd's fur glistened with droplets, his eyes tracking every gust as if expecting an ambush. Inside, Agnes bustled in the kitchen, her tea kettle whistling, but her glances out the window betrayed her unease. Victor Grayson's shadow from the night before lingered in her mind, a threat she couldn't shake. Tommy felt it too, a prickling on his neck, a whisper of danger he couldn't name. Lila Hayes darted over mid-morning, her raincoat dripping as she slipped onto the porch. "Tommy," she hissed, her voice urgent. "There's a guy asking about Shadow. Tall, creepy, all in black. I heard him at the bait shop." Tommy's eyes widened, his small hands clutching the porch rail. "What's he want?" Lila shrugged, her green eyes glinting with determination. "Dunno, but he's bad news. We gotta watch out." Shadow shifted closer to Tommy, his presence a quiet shield, and the boy nodded, a pact forming between them. The day dragged on, the rain a steady drumbeat against the roof. Shadow began to follow Tommy like a shadow himself, inside to the kitchen, back to the porch, always a few feet behind, his claws clicking softly. It was a change Agnes noticed, her heart lifting despite the storm. "He's sticking by you, Tommy," she said, pouring him cocoa. The boy smiled faintly, his fingers brushing the air near Shadow, not quite touching. "He knows I won't hurt him," he murmured, hope threading his words. But night brought the real test. The rain thickened, wind howling through the pines, rattling the shed where Shadow had taken refuge. Tommy peered out, his breath fogging the glass, when a shadow moved, not the wind, but a man. Victor Grayson crept toward the shed, a crowbar glinting in his hand. Shadow erupted, a blur of fur and fury lunging through the cracked door. His teeth snapped inches from Victor's arm, a roar of defiance tearing from his throat. The man stumbled back, cursing, his coat snagging on a nail as he fled into the storm. Agnes burst onto the porch, shotgun in hand, her nurse's calm replaced by a mother's fire. "Get off my land!" she bellowed, her voice cutting through the rain. Victor spun, his face a mask of cold rage, rain streaking his sharp features. "That dog's Harrison's property," he snarled, his words a venomous promise. "You'll regret this." He vanished into the dark, leaving the shed door swinging, the night alive with menace. Tommy ran out, heedless of the rain, and threw his arms around Shadow. "You're mine, not his," he sobbed, his small body shaking as the dog pressed close, hot breath mingling with the scent of wet fur. Shadow's growl softened, his head dipping to rest against Tommy's shoulder. A vow sealed in the downpour. Agnes watched, her shotgun lowering, pride and fear warring in her chest. She'd faced threats before, but this was personal, her boy, her dog, her fight. Lila, hidden by the fence, saw it all, her heart pounding. She'd followed Victor from town, her sneakers soaked, and now she knew this wasn't just a stray's tale. She darted home, scribbling in her notebook, "Harrison's man, danger." Back at the cottage, Agnes herded Tommy inside, wrapping him in a blanket by the fire. Shadow stayed near the door, his eyes fixed on the night, a guardian born anew. The morning after Victor Grayson's retreat dawned gray and sodden, the rain leaving Boothbay's streets slick with puddles that mirrored a bruised sky. Word of the night's drama spread like wildfire, carried on the tongues of fishermen hauling their catch and widows gossiping over coffee. By noon, Maggie Pierce's bakery, a cozy haven of clapboard and cinnamon, buzzed with more than its usual crowd. She'd called a meeting, her soft voice trembling with resolve as she stood behind the counter, a tray of scones cooling beside her. "That boy and his dog need us," she declared, her silver curls catching the light. "No stranger's gonna threaten our own." Tommy Sullivan sat near the window, his small hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate, Shadow pressed close to his side. The German shepherd's fur still glistened faintly from the rain, his amber eyes scanning the room with a wary alertness that hadn't faded since Victor's attack. Agnes O'Connor stood beside them, her shawl pulled tight, her gray eyes fierce with a nurse's grit. She'd recounted the night to Maggie earlier, Victor's crowbar, Shadow's lunge, the chilling threat about Harrison, and now the town gathered to hear it again, their faces a mix of shock and determination. The bakery's wooden tables groaned under the weight of locals, grizzled men in oilskins, women with knitting needles paused mid-stitch, even a few kids peering from the back. Captain Daniel Morrow limped in, his cane tapping a steady rhythm, and took a seat near the door. His sea-blue eyes met Agnes's, a silent pact passing between them. "Harrison's no ghost story," he rasped, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "He's running a private outfit now, security dogs for hire. Sells 'em off when they're broken, or worse. That mutt's living proof of what he's done." Tommy's chest tightened, his fingers brushing Shadow's damp fur. "He's not broken," he said, his voice small but clear, drawing every eye. "He's my friend." The room softened, a ripple of nods spreading. Maggie stepped forward, her hands clasped. "Then we protect him. And you, Tommy. This town doesn't bow to bullies." She proposed a watch. Neighbors keeping eyes on the cottage, fishermen patrolling the lanes. The crowd murmured agreement, their voices rising like the tide. But dusk brought the test. As the meeting broke up, shadows lengthened across Booth Bay, the air thick with salt and unease. Tommy and Agnes walked home, Shadow at their heels, when headlights flared down the sandy lane. Victor Grayson's black sedan rolled to a stop, flanked by two burly men in dark jackets. Their boots crunched gravel as they approached, Victor's cold eyes glinting under the fading light. "Hand over the dog," he snapped, his voice a blade. "Harrison's orders." Agnes stepped in front of Tommy, her stance unyielding. "You've got no claim here," she retorted, her hands balling into fists. Shadow growled low, positioning himself between them, his hackles rising. The men hesitated, but Victor smirked, reaching for something in his coat, a flash of metal, a threat unspoken. Before he could act, lanterns flickered to life along the dunes. Fishermen emerged from the shadows, their weathered faces stern, wielding oars and nets. Widows followed, clutching rolling pins, their voices sharp with defiance. "Get gone," one shouted, and the cry echoed. Victor's smirk faltered, his men shifting uneasily. Tommy clung to Shadow, his heart pounding, and yelled, "He's my family." The words rang out, a child's truth cutting deeper than any weapon. The townsfolk closed in, a wall of lanterns and grit, and Victor sneered, "This ain't over," before retreating to his car. Engines roared as they sped off, taillights swallowed by the dark. Back at the cottage, Agnes sank into a chair, her hands trembling now that the fight was done. Tommy hugged Shadow, his face buried in the dog's fur, whispering, "We won, buddy." Lila Hayes slipped in, her raincoat dripping, her green eyes wide with awe. "I saw it all," she said, clutching her notebook. "They're scared of us now." She trailed Victor from the docks, her curiosity a flame that wouldn't dim, and now she proposed a plan, digging into his moves, finding out what Harrison wanted. The night settled, the sea's restless song a backdrop to their fragile victory. Agnes lit the fire, her mind racing. Boothbay had answered the call, but Victor's threat lingered like smoke. Tommy sat by Shadow, his small hand resting near the dog's paw, a bond forged in the storm. The town's lanterns glowed beyond the windows, a promise of strength, but the war was far from won. The next morning broke clear, sunlight piercing Boothbay's fog like a blade through gauze. Tommy Sullivan woke to Shadow's warmth beside his bed, the first time the dog had slept inside, a quiet milestone that lit the boy's face with a grin. Downstairs, Agnes brewed coffee, her hand steady despite the sleepless night, while the sea whispered gently beyond the dunes. But the calm was a mask. Victor's retreat had left a shadow over the cottage, a tension that pulsed in every creak of the floorboards. Lila Hayes arrived mid-morning, her sneakers leaving sandy prints on the porch. "I've got something," she announced, her voice brimming with urgency, as she pulled a crumpled newspaper from her backpack. She'd slipped into the town library at dawn, rifling through old records, driven by the night's defiance. The headline glared in faded ink: "Military Dog Saves Unit in Afghanistan. Ambush." Below it, a grainy photo showed a German shepherd, Shadow, unmistakable with his notched ear, beside a soldier. "That's your dad, Tommy," Lila said, pointing to the man's blurred face. "Lieutenant Patrick Sullivan." Tommy's breath caught, his small hands trembling as he took the paper. Agnes froze, coffee mug halfway to her lips, her gray eyes flooding with memory. Patrick, her son, Tommy's father, had died in that war, his last letter a crumpled keepsake she'd tucked away. "He never told me about a dog," she whispered, sinking into a chair. Lila traced the article with her finger. "Says here Rex, that's Shadow, sniffed out an ambush, saved a dozen men. But something went wrong after. He got shipped off, labeled trouble." The boy stared at the photo, his world tilting. Shadow nudged his hand, a low whine rising from his throat as if sensing the storm within. Tommy's voice broke, soft and raw. "Did you know my daddy?" he asked, his brown eyes searching the dog's amber ones. Shadow's head dipped, resting on Tommy's lap, a first, a gentle weight that shattered the boy's walls. Tears spilled down his cheeks, soaking the paper, and he sobbed, "You were there." Agnes watched, her heart breaking anew, the loss of her son colliding with this unexpected thread to him. Outside, the day marched on, gulls wheeling over the docks. Lila paced, her mind racing. "If Shadow saved your dad's unit, why's Harrison after him?" she mused, flipping her notebook open. Agnes wiped her eyes, resolve hardening. "To bury it. A dog that brave threatens whatever he's hiding." She pulled a box from the attic, Patrick's things, and found a faded photo, him with Shadow smiling in dusty fatigues. "He loved that dog," she said, her voice thick. "Wrote me once about a mutt that wouldn't quit. Never said it was this one." Tommy clung to Shadow, the dog's warmth anchoring him as grief and wonder tangled inside. "We gotta stop them, Nana," he said, his small voice fierce. "For Dad." Agnes nodded, her nurse's steel rising. "We will, Tommy. For both of them." But danger loomed closer than they knew. Down the beach road, Victor's sedan idled, his cold eyes tracking a delivery truck rumbling past. He'd seen the town stand, felt its pulse, and now he plotted, Harrison's orders burning in his pocket. Lila slipped out, vowing to dig deeper, her sneakers kicking sand as she ran to the library. Agnes locked the doors, her hands steady with purpose, while Tommy sat by the fire, Shadow's head still in his lap. The dog's eyes followed every sound, the wind, the sea, the distant hum of a car, his instincts sharp despite the years. The photo lay beside them, a bridge to a past that refused to stay buried. The sun dipped low, painting the dunes gold, but the cottage felt like a fortress under siege. Agnes murmured to herself, "Patrick would have fought for you, Shadow." Tommy echoed her, whispering, "We will too." The truth had lit a fire in them, a fragile flame against the dark closing in. Beyond the windows, Boothbay hummed with life, unaware of the battle brewing, a boy, a dog, and a town on the edge of something bigger. The sun sank low over Boothbay, casting a blood-orange glow across the pier warehouse where Major James Harrison stood, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the weathered planks beneath him. He'd arrived that morning, his private security firm staging a demonstration for military buyers, dogs leaping through hoops, barking on command, a polished facade of control. Inside, Tommy Sullivan crouched behind a crate, his heart hammering, shadow pressed tight against his side. Agnes O'Connor and Captain Daniel Morrow flanked them, their faces grim as they peered through the salt-streaked windows. They'd slipped in at dusk, driven by Lila's tip about Harrison's event, determined to expose the truth. The warehouse smelled of fish and oil, its cavernous space echoing with the sharp commands of handlers. Beyond the demo ring, a row of kennels loomed, their steel bars glinting under floodlights. Shadow's ears pricked, his amber eyes narrowing as a faint whine reached him. Dogs, caged and trembling, their fates sealed. Tommy whispered, "They're scared, Shadow," his small hand brushing the dog's scarred flank. Daniel nodded, his cane tapping softly. "Harrison's cleaning house. Those ones won't make it past tonight." Agnes's jaw tightened, her nurse's hands itching to act. "We can't let him," she said, her voice steel. Outside, Harrison's voice boomed, smooth and commanding, touting his enhanced training methods to a crowd of stern-faced buyers. "Loyalty through discipline," he proclaimed, his smile masking the cruelty Tommy now knew by heart. The boy's mind flashed to the photo of his dad with Shadow, the newspaper clipping Lila had found, proof of a hero Harrison had tried to bury. "We gotta free him," Tommy said, his brown eyes fierce. Daniel hesitated, then handed him a rusty bolt cutter from his coat. "Through the vent, kid. Quick and quiet." Tommy crawled into the narrow duct, his sneakers scraping metal, Shadow slinking behind like a shadow himself. The air grew thick with the stench of fear as they emerged near the kennels. 5 dogs, lean, scarred, sedated, lay slumped in their cages, their eyes dull with resignation. Shadow growled low, nudging a lock, and Tommy snapped it open, his small hands trembling but sure. One by one the dogs stirred, staggering free, their unsteady steps sparking chaos as they scattered into the demo ring. Harrison's speech faltered, his polished mask slipping as buyers gasped and handlers shouted. "What the hell?" Ugh, he barked, spinning toward the commotion. Tommy ducked behind a barrel, Shadow at his heels, as the freed dogs bolted past, their bark shattering the staged perfection. Agnes seized the moment, stepping into the open with Daniel. "This is what you call loyalty?" she yelled, her voice cutting through the din. Daniel raised a megaphone, his raspy tone booming. "Major Harrison abuses these animals, sells them off or kills them when they resist. That dog there," he pointed to Shadow, now visible beside Tommy, "saved lives in Afghanistan. And you marked him for death." The crowd murmured, buyers shifting uneasily, some pulling out phones to record. Harrison's face darkened, his hands clenching. "Lies from a washed-up sailor and a meddling hag," he snapped, signaling his men. Victor Grayson emerged from the shadows, his cold eyes locking on Shadow, a pistol glinting at his hip. But before he could move, boots pounded the pier. Sheriff Robert Davidson and his deputies, alerted by Maggie Pierce's frantic call from town. "Drop it, Grayson!" the sheriff barked, his hand on his holster. Victor froze, outnumbered, as the townsfolk flooded in behind. Fishermen, widows, Lila, with her notebook raised like a shield. Tommy stood tall, Shadow beside him, his small voice ringing out. "He's my family. You can't have him." The words pierced the chaos, a child's truth silencing even Harrison. The major sneered, "You'll pay for this." But the sheriff's cuffs clicked around his wrists, deputies rounding up his men. Victor slipped through the fray, vanishing into the night, his parting glare a promise of vengeance. The freed dogs huddled near Shadow, their rescuer, as the crowd cheered, Boothbay's spirit a tide against Harrison's fall. Back at the cottage, Agnes hugged Tommy tight, her hand shaking with relief. "You're braver than I ever was," she whispered. Shadow pressed close, his warmth a steady anchor. Lila burst in, grinning. "We did it," she crowed, but Daniel's frown lingered. "Victor's still out there," he warned, his cane tapping a restless beat. The night settled, the sea song a triumphant hum, but the victory felt fragile, a prelude to a darker storm brewing. The pier warehouse smoldered under a midnight sky, acrid smoke curling into Boothbay's crisp air as flames licked its wooden walls. Victor Grayson had returned, a match struck in vengeance after Harrison's arrest, his black sedan idling unseen down the lane. Inside, Tommy Sullivan and Agnes O'Connor stood frozen, their victory cut short by the fire's roar. Shadow's ears flattened, his growl a low rumble as he paced near the kennels where two sedated dogs remained, left behind in the chaos, too weak to flee. The boy's heart sank, his brown eyes wide with terror. "We can't leave 'em," he cried, his voice cracking over the crackle of burning timber. Agnes grabbed his arm, her nurse's calm fraying. "Tommy, it's too dangerous," she shouted, the heat stinging her face. Outside, the townsfolk gathered, fishermen with buckets, Maggie Pierce sobbing into her apron. But the fire spread too fast, a beast devouring the night. Shadow bolted toward the kennels, his scarred body a blur through the smoke, driven by an instinct Tommy knew too well. "Shadow, no!" the boy yelled, lunging after him, but Agnes held him back, her grip iron despite her trembling hands. The German shepherd disappeared into the haze, his bark sharp and urgent. Inside, the kennels glowed orange, the air thick with ash and despair. Two young shepherds, barely more than pups, lay slumped in their cages, their breaths shallow from sedatives Harrison's men had used. Shadow nudged them, his teeth tugging at a chain rousing one to its feet. The second whimpered, too weak to move, and he pressed against it, urging life into its limp form. Flames danced closer, a beam groaning overhead, but Shadow didn't falter, his soldier's spirit alive in the inferno. Tommy broke free, racing to the warehouse edge, his sneakers skidding on wet planks. "Shadow!" he screamed, tears streaking his soot-stained face as smoke burned his lungs. Agnes stumbled after, shouting his name, her shawl catching embers. Daniel Morrow hobbled up, his cane useless in the chaos, and bellowed, "Get back, kid!" But Tommy stood transfixed, watching Shadow's dark shape weave through the fire, guiding the first pup toward a cracked window. It staggered out, collapsing into a fisherman's arms, but the second remained trapped. A beam crashed down, splitting the kennel in two, flames surging between Shadow and his charge. The dog snarled, pivoting to the rear wall, his eyes scanning for escape. Tommy's voice pierced the roar. "Please, come back!" And Shadow's ears twitched, a fleeting glance toward the boy he'd sworn to protect. With a burst of strength he rammed the weakened wall, his body slamming against it once, twice, until the wood splintered. The second pup stumbled through, singed but alive, and Shadow followed, his coat smoking, his legs buckling as he cleared the gap. The warehouse groaned, its roof caving in moments after they escaped, a thunderous collapse that shook the pier. Shadow collapsed yards from safety, his breath ragged, burns searing his left side. Tommy ran to him, dropping to his knees in the mud, sobbing, "Don't leave me, Shadow." Agnes reached them, her hands hovering over the dog's trembling form, her nurse's training kicking in. "He's hurt bad," she whispered, her voice breaking as she pressed her shawl to his wounds. The townsfolk surged forward, fishermen dousing embers, Maggie fetching water, Lila snapping photos through tears. Daniel knelt beside Agnes, his weathered face grim. "He's a fighter," he said, but doubt shadowed his words. Dr. Claire Thompson, the local vet, arrived in her truck, her medical bag slamming open as she assessed Shadow. "Smoke inhalation severe," she reported, her gentle hands working fast. "We need to get him to the clinic, now." They lifted Shadow onto a stretcher, Tommy clinging to his paw, his small body racked with sobs. "You saved him, buddy," he whispered, the sea's mournful cry echoing his grief. The clinic became a beacon as the town rallied, lanterns guiding the way, voices praying under the moon. Agnes held Tommy close, her resolve wavering, while Victor's sedan vanished into the night, his mission a twisted triumph. The fire died to embers, but Shadow's fate hung in the balance, a hero teetering on the edge. The veterinary clinic in Boothbay glowed faintly under a dawn sky, its whitewashed walls a stark contrast to the charred remnants of the pier warehouse smoldering in memory. Inside, Shadow lay on a padded table, his scarred body hooked to monitors, his breath shallow but steady. Dr. Claire Thompson moved with quiet precision, her gentle hands adjusting an oxygen mask over his muzzle, her brow furrowed with cautious hope. Tommy Sullivan sat beside him, his small hand clutching Shadow's paw, his brown eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. Agnes O'Connor stood nearby, her shawl draped over her shoulders, her nurse's calm masking the ache in her chest. The fire had left its mark. Shadow's left side bore angry burns, his fur singed to patchy black, and smoke had seared his lungs. Yet he'd fought through the night, his warrior spirit a flicker against the odds. Claire glanced at Tommy, her voice soft. "He's holding on, kid. The next few hours are critical, but he's got a chance. Because of you." Tommy nodded, his voice a whisper. "He saved those dogs, Dr. Claire. He's gotta make it." Shadow's tail thumped weakly against the table, a small sign of life that lit the boy's face with fragile hope. Outside, Boothbay rallied. Fishermen trudged in with thermos of coffee, their oilskins dripping from the morning mist, while Maggie Pierce organized a rotation of widows bearing blankets and broth. Lila Hayes burst through the door, her raincoat sodden, a radio microphone in hand. "I called the station," she announced, her green eyes blazing. "Told 'em Shadow's story, how he faced Harrison, saved those pups. They're airing it statewide." Agnes's lips twitched into a faint smile, pride piercing her worry. "You're a force, Lila," she said, her hands steadying Tommy's trembling shoulders. The broadcast crackled through a portable radio Maggie set up, Lila's voice weaving Shadow's tale. His military past, his rescue from the auction, his stand against Victor's flames. Calls flooded in. Donations from Portland, offers of vet supplies from Bangor, a retired Marine pledging funds from Augusta. By noon, the clinic parking lot brimmed with townsfolk, their lanterns replaced by signs, "Save Shadow." Tommy stepped out, his sneakers crunching gravel, and gasped at the crowd. "They're all here for you, buddy," he whispered, glancing back at Shadow through the window. Inside, Claire worked tirelessly. Her team, bolstered by a specialist, rushed in from Brunswick. Shadow stirred mid-afternoon, his amber eyes fluttering open, locking on Tommy as the boy returned to his side. "Hey, hero," Tommy said, his voice thick with tears. The dog's tail thumped again, stronger now, and Claire exhaled, a rare smile breaking through. "He's fighting for you, Tommy. The oxygen's helping. Burns are bad, but he's stabilizing." Agnes sank into a chair, her hands clasping her shawl, relief washing over her like the tide. The town didn't stop. Fishermen pooled their day's catch earnings, widows stitched a quilt for the clinic, and Lila's radio plea sparked a plan. Second Chance. A shelter for military dogs, born from Shadow's courage. Maggie spearheaded it, her bakery a hub of blueprints and promises. "He's shown us what's possible," she said, her silver curls bouncing as she rallied support. By evening, a local contractor pledged lumber, and the sheriff vowed patrols to keep Victor at bay. The community's heartbeat pulsed through every act, a lifeline for the dog who'd saved their spirit. Shadow's recovery crept forward, each day a small victory. On the third morning he stood, shaky, bandaged, but upright, his eyes clear as he nudged Tommy's hand. The boy laughed, a sound pure and bright, and hugged him gently, mindful of the burns. "You're the best, Shadow," he said, his voice a vow. Claire nodded, her stethoscope dangling. "He's a miracle, Agnes. Needs rest, but he'll pull through." The clinic doors swung open, townsfolk cheering as Tommy led Shadow onto the porch, the sea's gentle roar a hymn of renewal. Agnes watched, her nurse's hands finally still, her heart swelling with a pride she hadn't felt since Patrick's letters home. "You've given us all a second chance," she murmured, her eyes on Shadow and Tommy silhouetted against the dawn. Lila snapped a photo, her notebook brimming with plans. Second Chance would rise, and Shadow would lead it. The chapter closed with the boy and dog by the shore, the tide washing away the night's ashes, a new day whispering promises of healing. 3 years later, the Second Chance shelter stood proud on Booth Bay's edge, its cedar walls rising where the dunes met the pines, a testament to Shadow's survival. Tommy Sullivan, now 10, walked its gravel paths, his sneakers crunching as he guided a timid Belgian Malinois named Scout, a recent arrival scarred by combat stress. Shadow padded beside them, his muzzle graying, his gait slowed by age and injury, but his amber eyes sharp with purpose. The shelter hummed with life, kennels of retired military dogs, veterans training beside them, a harmony of healing born from one boy's stand and one dog's courage. Agnes O'Connor oversaw it all, her shawl swapped for a clipboard, her nurse's grit now a quiet command. At 71 she moved with purpose, her gray hair glinting in the sun as she checked Scout's progress. "He's coming along, Tommy," she said, her voice warm. "Shadow's teaching him, just like he taught us." The boy grinned, his small hand brushing Shadow's flank, a bond unbroken by time. The shelter had grown from a dream to a beacon. Military brass sent their toughest cases here, awed by its success. A model of trust over force. That evening, Maggie Pierce hosted a festival at her bakery, the town spilling onto the lawn with lanterns as laughter. Lila Hayes, now 19 and a budding journalist, unveiled a plaque. "In memory of Lieutenant Patrick Sullivan, whose spirit lives in Second Chance." Tommy stood beside it, his chest tight with pride and loss, Shadow at his side. Agnes stepped forward, her hands trembling as she pulled a letter from her pocket. Patrick's last, kept secret until now. "He wrote this before he died," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "Let Rex run free. He's more than they know." The crowd hushed, the sea's murmur filling the silence. Tommy's eyes welled as he hugged Shadow, whispering, "Dad knew you'd find me." The dog's tail wagged, slow but sure, his head resting against the boy, a soldier's salute across years. Maggie lit candles, widows sang hymns, and fishermen raised mugs toasting a legacy forged in fire. Lila's camera flashed, capturing Shadow guiding Scout through the crowd, his gentle nudge calming the younger dog's nerves, a living echo of his own redemption. The shelter's impact rippled beyond Booth Bay. National news hailed Shadow's story, sparking laws for military dog welfare. The Shadow Act, mandating care and retirement rights. Tommy accepted a medal in D.C., his small voice trembling as he spoke of his friend, tears streaking his face on live TV. Back home, Agnes smiled. "Your dad's proud, Tommy." Her words a balm. Shadow, gray and steady, led a new rescue that night, a skittish shepherd. His patience a blueprint for healing etched in every scar. Victor Grayson's Shadow had faded, jailed after a botched attempt to silence a whistleblower. His threat extinguished by the town's vigilance. Sheriff Davidson's patrols kept the peace, while Daniel Morrow, now a shelter trainer, watched Tommy and Shadow with a rare softness. "He's a soldier still," he rasped, his cane tapping time to their steps. The festival ended under a full moon, its light bathing the shelter in silver, the pines whispering secrets of resilience. Tommy sat with Shadow on the cottage porch, the plaque glinting nearby. "You're my hero, always," he said, his voice older now, tempered by loss and love. Shadow's eyes met his, clear and calm, a warrior at rest. Agnes joined them, her hand on Tommy's shoulder, her heart full. The town slept, its lanterns dimming, but second chance glowed, a legacy of a boy and a dog who'd turned pain into purpose, a light for all who'd been broken. 5 years had passed since the fire that nearly claimed Shadow, and Booth Bay's coastline bore the quiet scars of time. The second chance. The shelter stood firm on the dune's edge, its cedar walls weathered by salt and wind, a sanctuary where military dogs and veterans found solace. Tommy Sullivan, now 12, walked the beach at dusk, his sneakers sinking into the sand, his sandy hair tousled by the breeze. Beside him, Shadow moved slowly, his muzzle silvered, his gait stiff from age and old wounds. The German shepherd's amber eyes, once fierce with the soldier's fire, now held a gentle clarity, a testament to battles won, not just in war, but in the years of healing that followed. The sea whispered a mournful song, its waves lapping the shore as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold. Tommy carried a small stick, tracing lines in the sand, patterns of whales and stars, echoes of the boy he'd been when Shadow first came into his life. The shelter hummed behind them, its kennels alive with soft barks, veterans laughing as they trained new rescues. Second Chance had grown to a national model, its success a ripple from Shadow's courage, but tonight felt different. A stillness hung in the air, a quiet farewell Tommy couldn't yet name. Shadow paused, his ears twitching as a lost pup darted from the pines, a skinny shepherd, barely a year old, its eyes wide with fear. The old dog turned, his body creaking with effort, and padded toward it. Tommy watched, his chest tightening as Shadow nudged the pup gently, guiding it back toward the shelter with the same patience he'd shown Scout years ago. The pup hesitated, then followed, its tail wagging faintly. A torch passed in the fading light. "You're still the best, Shadow," Tommy said, his voice soft, cracking with the weight of growing up. Back at the cottage, Agnes O'Connor sat on the porch, her shawl draped over her shoulders, her gray eyes tracing the pair against the sea. At 73, her hands bore deeper lines, her nurse's strength tempered by time, but her heart swelled with pride. She'd watched Tommy bloom from a quiet, grieving boy into a steady soul, his courage forged beside Shadow. The shelter's plaque, in memory of Lieutenant Patrick Sullivan, glinted nearby, its words a bridge to the past she'd carried silently. Tonight, she felt it. A closing chapter, a story nearing its end. Shadow climbed the porch steps, his breathing labored and settled beside Tommy with a sigh. The boy knelt, resting his hand on the dog's graying fur, feeling the warmth beneath the scars. "You're tired, huh?" he murmured, his brown eyes searching Shadow's. The dog's gaze met his steady and calm, a soldier at peace. Agnes joined them, her slippers whispering across the wood, and sat close, her hand on Tommy's shoulder. "He's been fighting a long time," she said, her voice thick with love and loss. "For you, for all of us." The town sensed it, too. Lanterns flickered to life along the dunes, a silent vigil as fishermen, widows, and children gathered. Boothbay's heartbeat pulsing in the night. Maggie Pierce arrived, her silver curls damp from the mist, a basket of scones in hand. Lila Hayes, now a college freshman, followed, her camera slung over her shoulder, her green eyes misty. "He's a legend," Lila said, snapping a photo of Shadow resting against Tommy, the moon rising full behind them. Daniel Morrow limped up, his cane sinking into the sand, his sea-blue eyes soft. "He's earned his rest," he rasped, a rare tear glinting on his weathered cheek. Tommy's throat tightened, memories flooding back. The auction's sneers, the storm's rain, the fire's roar. Shadow had been his anchor, his hero, pulling him from grief's abyss with every tentative step, every quiet night on this porch. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice breaking as he stroked Shadow's notched ear. The dog's eyes fluttered, his breath slowing, and he pressed his head against Tommy's hand. A final salute, a bond unbroken by time or pain. Agnes spoke softly, her words weaving through the night. "Your dad found him first, Tommy. In Afghanistan, Shadow was his shadow, kept him safe till the end. Then he found you." She pulled Patrick's letter from her shawl, its edges worn, and read aloud. "Let Rex run free. He's more than they know." Tommy's tears fell, soaking Shadow's fur, and he nodded, understanding at last. "You're free now, buddy," he said, his voice a vow. Shadow's tail thumped once, weak but sure, and his eyes closed, his body stilling under the moonlight. The crowd hushed, candles flickering in their hands, a sea of light honoring a warrior's passing. Tommy sobbed, burying his face in Shadow's fur, Agnes's arms encircling him, her own tears falling silently. Maggie knelt beside them, her hand on Tommy's back, while Lila captured the moment, a boy and his dog, a town's heart laid bare. Daniel stood watch, his cane planted firm, a soldier saluting a brother in arms. The sea's song rose, mournful yet tender, carrying Shadow's spirit beyond the horizon. The next morning Tommy stood by the shore, a pine sapling in his hands. The town gathered, their faces solemn as he dug a hole near the dunes, Shadow's resting place marked by the tree, and a stone etched with hero. Agnes helped him plant it, her hand steady despite her grief, whispering, "He healed us all, Tommy." The sapling's roots sank deep, a new life rising where shadows had ended, its branches reaching for the sky. Months later, Second Chance thrived, its kennels full, its legacy cemented in laws, and lives changed. Tommy, taller now, led Scout and the lost pup, named Rex. Along the beach there barks a joyful echo of Shadow's lessons. Agnes watched from the porch, her shawl a comfort, knowing Patrick's dream lived on. Lila's photos graced national papers, the Shadow Act. A monument to their fight, Boothbay's lanterns dimmed, but the shelter glowed, a lighthouse for the broken, lit by a boy and a dog who'd turned darkness into dawn. Under a crescent moon, Tommy sat by the sapling, its needles whispering in the wind. "You're still with me," he said, his voice steady, a young man shaped by love and loss. The sea rolled on, its waves a lullaby, and in its rhythm he heard Shadow's heartbeat, a legacy of loyalty and healing forever etched in Boothbay's soul. The story closed, not with an end, but with a beginning, a light beneath the moonlight, guiding others home. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.